People keep asking me to comment on the headlines, on the screenshots, on the trending clips, on the idea that I somehow vanished behind a block button and left chaos in my wake. And the truth is, my life has always existed in this strange overlap between engineering problems and human ones, rockets and relationships, code and children. And when you live in public, every silence becomes a statement, and every system glitch becomes a moral failure. So let me tell it the way it feels from my side, not as a press release, not as a legal filing, but as a human trying to co-parent while running companies that never sleep. I wake up and X is on fire, people saying I blocked the mother of my kids, people projecting motives, cruelty, strategy, control. And the reality is that social platforms reduce complex emotional bandwidth into binary switches, follow or block, seen or unseen. And when boundaries get set, they're instantly framed as warfare. I've learned the hard way that privacy doesn't really exist when your name trends. Every attempt to de-escalate becomes escalation because attention feeds on friction. Grimes and I are both intense people, creative people, stubborn people. We bonded over ideas that felt bigger than ourselves, and now we're trying to translate that same intensity into a stable environment for children who didn't ask to be symbols. Co-parenting isn't a PR strategy, it's logistics, schedules, school decisions, health, security, and yes, sometimes disagreement, and when those disagreements leak into public space, they mutate. Suddenly, it's not two parents negotiating. It's millions of strangers voting on who's the villain. I'm portrayed as the cold tech billionaire, pressing buttons and locking doors. She's portrayed as the artist fighting for access and voice. But real life is messier and quieter. There are texts that don't get answered fast enough, calls that happen at the wrong time zone, decisions that have to be made quickly with imperfect information. And somewhere in there are kids who need consistency more than commentary. I don't block people to punish them. I block noise. I mute chaos. And sometimes systems behave in ways people don't like or don't understand. Sometimes stepping back is the only way to keep something from completely breaking. The irony is that I built platforms around free expression, and now I'm criticized for exercising the most basic form of it, which is choosing when not to engage. I'm not perfect at this. I never claimed to be. I'm learning in real time how impossible it is to separate personal life from public infrastructure when you are the infrastructure to a lot of people. Co-parenting under a microscope means every move feels like a chess piece instead of a feeling. But behind the memes and the headlines, there is a simple goal that hasn't changed: protect the kids, keep things functional, reduce long-term damage, and maybe one day people will understand that silence isn't always hostility, distance isn't always abandonment, and not every boundary is a declaration of war. Sometimes it's just an engineer trying to keep a very fragile system from overheating, where the whole world watches the temperature gauge blink red. Part 2 of this story doesn't get clicks because it's slower and less dramatic, but it's the part that actually matters, the part where after the trending tabs refresh and the outrage cycles move on, you're still left with calendars, lawyers, therapists, assistants, and the quiet weight of responsibility that doesn't trend anywhere. People assume power makes these things easier when in reality, it adds layers of friction. Every decision has second and third order effects. Every message can be screenshotted. Every misunderstanding can become lore, and I've learned that when you respond emotionally in public, you lock everyone into a version of events that can't evolve. Grimes and I aren't enemies in some cinematic sense. We're two people who loved each other, created life together, and then discovered that love and long-term compatibility are different engineering problems. You can't brute force harmony, you can't iterate your way out of fundamental differences overnight. And when those differences intersect with fame, the feedback loop gets violent fast. I'm painted as absent, controlling, unreachable, and she's painted as volatile, manipulative, dramatic. And none of those labels help children feel safe. They just help audiences feel entertained. What people don't see are the hours spent trying to align on schooling philosophies, on exposure levels, on how much of their lives should exist online at all. I worry about digital permanence, about kids growing up and finding their childhood turned into discourse threads and reaction videos. I worry about them being used as leverage by strangers who think proximity to celebrity gives them moral authority. Sometimes the most responsible move is disengagement. Not because you don't care, but because engagement fuels a machine that doesn't know when to stop. I've been accused of controlling narratives while actively refusing to participate in them, which is a paradox, but also kind of the point. You don't win by feeding fire, you just decide what you're willing to burn. Co-parenting is supposed to be about trust and predictability, and when trust fractures, you replace it with structure, schedules, intermediaries, systems that remove emotion from high-stakes decisions. People mistake that for coldness, but it's actually compassion at scale. I don't want my kids learning conflict resolution from viral posts. I want them learning it from calm rooms and consistent presence. I know the story people want is simpler: hero and villain, artist and tyrant, mother and absentee father. But real life doesn't compile that cleanly. It throws errors, it crashes, it forces you to patch while running. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the hardest problems aren't rockets or AI or cars, they're human ones. Especially when love turns into logistics and privacy turns into a battlefield. I'm not telling this to be liked. I'm telling it because someday my kids might read about this era, and I want there to be at least one version that isn't screaming. One version that says I tried to act with restraint, even when restraint looked like silence, even when silence was misread as cruelty, because at the end of the day, my responsibility isn't to the timeline, it's to them, and I'll choose that, even if it means being misunderstood. Where you realize the story never really ends, it just keeps getting reinterpreted by people who weren't there. And by this point, I've accepted that no clarification will ever be sufficient, because clarity doesn't scale as fast as speculation. I watch narratives harden into identity. I see how a single claim becomes an immutable truth once it's repeated enough times. And I understand why people want a clean ending, an apology tour, a villain confession, a moment where someone definitively wins. But co-parenting isn't a season finale. It's an ongoing process with no credits and no applause. Every day, you're choosing restraint again and again, even when provocation would be easier, even when responding would feel cathartic. There are moments I want to explain everything, to upload timelines and receipts in context like debug logs, but then I imagine my kids older scrolling through that archive and realizing their parents' hardest moments were treated like content, and that stops me. The internet confuses access with entitlement. People think seeing fragments of a situation means they deserve the whole thing, but some things only function when they're shielded from mass opinion, love, conflict, growth. These aren't open source projects. I've been accused of weaponizing silence while simultaneously being told I talk too much about everything else. And that contradiction says more about the environment than about me. I'm navigating a reality where any movement is interpreted as intention, where even not clicking the button becomes evidence in someone else's case. But I still believe in long-term thinking, in choosing paths that minimize regret years down the line rather than optimize for applause today. Grimes and I will always be linked through our children. That's not a burden, it's a responsibility. And responsibility means sometimes absorbing blame without retaliation, sometimes letting a story exist that isn't flattering, because correcting it would cause more harm than good. I know how this looks to people who live online. It looks evasive, it looks calculated, it looks cold, but from the inside it feels like choosing not to accelerate into a wall just because people are chanting for speed. I don't need to be perceived as right. I need my kids to be okay, to feel loved by both parents without being pulled into loyalty tests designed by strangers. The strangest part of all this is that while the world debates my intentions, I'm still doing the mundane work of parenting, showing up when I can, planning futures, worrying about things no headline will ever mention, and maybe that's the quiet truth underneath all of it. That real care rarely announces itself, it just persists, unfashionable and unviral, long after the drama cycle has moved on to someone else.